Wealthy CEO freezes when he sees his black ex-wife at the bus stop, with twins who look just like him. Now, sitting in his luxury car wearing a suit that cost more than most people's rent, Blake realized he might have abandoned not just the love of his life, but his own children. Do you know what it feels like to discover you might be a father to children you never knew existed? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Blake Carson sat in the back of his Tesla, scrolling through his phone like any other Tuesday morning. The 25-year-old tech CEO had just closed a deal worth $40 million, and his driver was taking him to his penthouse office in downtown Chicago. Steam rose from his black coffee as he checked his Instagram. 3 million followers hanging on his every post about success, motivation, and living your best life. But when the car slowed down at the traffic light near Roosevelt and State, Blake's entire world stopped. There she was, standing at the bus stop in a faded winter coat, holding the hands of two small children. Amira Daniels, the woman he married in secret 3 years ago. The woman he abandoned without a single word when his family found out. Blake's coffee cup slipped from his hands, spilling across his $1,000 suit. His heart hammered against his chest as he stared through the tinted window. Those kids, a boy and girl, maybe 2 years old, they had his eyes. His exact same gray eyes and that crooked smile he inherited from his grandfather. "Sir, are you okay?" his driver asked. Noticing Blake's face had gone completely white. Blake couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The twins were clinging to Amira's legs as she checked her phone, probably wondering where the bus was. She looked tired, stressed. Her beautiful dark skin seemed pale, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the gorgeous curls he remembered running his fingers through. Have you ever had a moment where your past crashes into your present so hard it feels like getting hit by a truck? That's exactly what Blake was experiencing. Here was this woman who used to whisper, "I love you," in his ear every night, now standing at a city bus stop with children who looked just like him. Why was she taking the bus? Where was she going? And most importantly, were those his kids? The light turned green, but Blake's mind was racing backwards. 3 years ago, he was head over heels in love with Amira. She was smart, funny, and had this laugh that made him feel like he could conquer the world. But when his racist father threatened to cut him off financially and destroy his company, Blake made the most cowardly decision of his life. He disappeared, changed his number, moved to a different city, never looked back. Now, sitting in his luxury car wearing a suit that cost more than most people's rent, Blake realized he might have abandoned not just the love of his life, but his own children. "Turn around," Blake whispered to his driver. "Excuse me, sir." "Turn the car around. Now." But by the time they made it back to the bus stop, Amira and the twins were gone. The only thing left was a crumpled bus schedule blowing in the wind and Blake's racing heart. Do you know what it feels like to discover you might be a father to children you never knew existed? Blake was about to find out that some secrets can't stay buried forever. And this one was about to turn his perfectly controlled life completely upside down. He had to find her. But first, he had to figure out how to explain 3 years of silence to the woman whose heart he shattered. Blake couldn't focus on anything. Not the board meeting he was supposed to lead, not the investors calling his phone, not even the protein smoothie his assistant brought him. All he could think about were those gray eyes staring back at him from two little faces. He canceled everything and locked himself in his office, pulling up every social media platform he could think of. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, nothing. Amira Daniels had vanished from the internet completely. It was like she'd become a ghost. "Think, Blake, think," he muttered to himself, pacing behind his glass desk. He remembered she had a best friend named Keisha who used to work at the coffee shop near the University of Texas. Maybe she'd know something. Blake found Keisha's Instagram and sent her a direct message. "Hey, this is Blake. I'm looking for Amira. It's important." The response came back in minutes. "Are you serious right now? After what you did to her? Don't contact me again." Blake's hands shook as he typed back. "Please. I saw her today. With kids. I need to know if they're mine." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Meet me at Millennium Park, Navy Pier entrance. 1 hour." And Blake, If you hurt her again, I'll destroy you myself. Have you ever felt like your entire future depended on one conversation? Blake drove to Navy Pier faster than he'd ever driven in his life. Keisha was waiting by the lake, arms crossed, wearing an expression that could freeze hell over. "Those babies you saw," she said before Blake could even say hello. "Zoe and Zion. They're 2.5 years old. You do the math." Blake's legs nearly gave out. Are they mine? What do you think?" Keisha's voice was ice cold. "You walked out on her right after your wedding night. She found out she was pregnant 2 weeks later. Twins. And you? You were already posting pictures with some blonde Instagram model." The words hit Blake like physical blows. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You blocked her number, remember? Changed your email. When she tried to reach you through your company, your assistant said you were unavailable indefinitely." Blake sat down on a nearby bench, his head in his hands. "Where is she now? How is she surviving?" "She works 2 jobs. Cleans offices at night, works at a daycare during the day. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Pilsen with those babies. Never took a dime from any man, never asked for help, never even said your name out loud. Does this sound like the life you'd want for the mother of your children?" Blake's chest felt like it was caving in. While he was building his empire and buying expensive cars, Amira was raising his kids alone, scrubbing floors to pay rent. "I need to see her," Blake said quietly. "She doesn't want to see you. But the kids don't." Keisha's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare use those babies as an excuse. You had your chance to be a man. You chose to be a coward instead." Keisha started to walk away, but Blake called after her. "What would it take? What would it take for her to give me 5 minutes?" She turned back with a look that could cut glass. "Prove you're not the same selfish boy who broke her heart. But honestly, I don't think you have it in you." Blake didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the Chicago skyline, with Keisha's words echoing in his head. "Prove you're not the same selfish boy who broke her heart. How do you prove you've changed when you're not even sure you have?" By 6 a.m., Blake was already dressed and driving through the streets of Pilsen, looking for any sign of Amira. He'd gotten her address from a private investigator, something that made him feel like a stalker, but he was desperate. The neighborhood was nothing like his world of glass towers and marble lobbies. These were small houses with chain-link fences, corner stores with signs in Spanish, and working-class families trying to make ends meet. Blake had never felt more out of place in his life. He parked across the street from a small brick building and waited. At 7:30 a.m., the front door opened, and there she was. Amira stepped out carrying a diaper bag, with Zoe on her hip and Zion holding her hand. She looked exhausted, but she was still the most beautiful woman Blake had ever seen. The twins were bundled up in winter coats that looked like they came from a thrift store, but their little faces were bright and curious. When Zion pointed at a dog walking by, Blake could see his own smile reflected in that tiny face. Have you ever watched your children from a distance, knowing you have no right to be in their lives? Blake's heart broke a little more with every step they took toward the bus stop. He followed them at a distance, watching as Amira helped both kids onto the city bus. She was so gentle with them, so patient. When Zoe started fussing, Amira pulled out a small toy and made funny faces until the little girl giggled. This woman was raising his children alone, and she was doing an amazing job. Blake followed the bus route in his car, watching through the windows as Amira entertained the twins during the long ride. They got off at a stop near downtown, and Blake watched from across the street as she dropped them off at a daycare center. The woman at the front desk hugged both kids like they were her own grandchildren. "Good morning, Zoe." "Good morning, Zion," she called out cheerfully. Blake could see that despite their struggles, Amira had created a loving community around their children. After dropping off the twins, Amira walked 6 blocks to a small office building. Blake watched her pull out a uniform from her bag and head inside. This was probably her daytime job, the one Keisha mentioned. As Blake sat in his car, watching the building where the mother of his children was working to survive, he made a decision. He couldn't just show up and demand to be part of their lives. He had to earn it. But how do you earn forgiveness from someone whose heart you completely destroyed? Blake pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. "I need you to set up a trust fund. Chill. For 2 children named Zoe and Zion Daniels. How much are we talking about, sir? Blake looked at the office building where Amira was probably cleaning toilets to feed his kids. $5 million. Each. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. 3 weeks later, Blake had learned Amira's entire routine. He knew she dropped the twins at daycare at 8 a.m., worked at the cleaning company until 4 p.m., picked up the kids, went home for dinner, then headed to her night job at the office complex downtown. He'd also been anonymously paying for things. The daycare bill, the twins' winter clothes, groceries delivered to her apartment with no return address. Blake told himself he was helping, but deep down he knew he was just trying to ease his own guilt. Tonight was different. Tonight, he was going to face her. Blake waited in the parking lot of the office building where Amira worked her night shift. At 11 p.m., she emerged from the back in trance, looking tired and carrying a small backpack. She was walking toward the bus stop when Blake stepped out from behind a pillar. Amira. She froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she turned around slowly, and Blake saw her face clearly for the first time in 3 years. She was still beautiful, but there were dark circles under her eyes and new lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet, but Blake could hear the anger underneath. "I needed to see you, to talk to you. 3 years too late for that." She started walking again, but Blake followed. "I saw them. Zoe and Zion. They're mine, aren't they?" Amira stopped walking and turned to face him. Don't you dare come here and act like you have some kind of right to know. I'm their father." "No." Her voice was sharp now. "You're a sperm donor. Their father would have been there when I was throwing up every morning for 4 months. Their father would have held my hand during the 27 hours of labor. Their father would have been there for their first steps, their first words, their first everything." Blake felt like he'd been slapped. "I didn't know you were pregnant. Because you ran away like a coward the second things got difficult. Have you ever had to face the worst thing you've ever done?" Blake was discovering that the truth was even more painful than he'd imagined. "My family, your family." Amira laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your family threatened to disown you if you stayed married to the black girl. So you chose money over love. You chose your trust fund over your wife. That's exactly what it was. You promised to love me forever, Blake. You promised we'd figure it out together. And then you disappeared like I meant nothing to you." Blake's eyes filled with tears. "You meant everything to me. If I meant everything to you, you would have fought for me. You would have told your family to go to hell. You would have chosen us." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Blake knew she was right. He'd had a choice 3 years ago, and he'd chosen wrong. "I want to meet them," he said quietly. "Absolutely not. They deserve to know their father. They deserve better than you." Amira started walking away again, but Blake called after her. "I'm different now. I've changed." She turned back one last time. "Prove it." Blake couldn't get Amira's words out of his head. "Prove it. But how do you prove you've changed when the woman you love won't even give you a chance?" The answer came to him 3 days later during a board meeting. Blake was sitting at the head of a marble conference table, listening to his investors discuss expanding the company internationally, when his phone buzzed with a news alert. Carson Tech CEO Blake Carson's secret past. Interracial marriage exposed. Blake's blood ran cold. The article had everything. Photos of him and Amira from their wedding day. Details about their relationship. And most damaging of all, speculation about whether he had abandoned her when she was pregnant. "Sir," one of his board members was looking at him strangely. "Are you all right?" Blake's phone was buzzing nonstop. His publicist, his lawyer, his assistant, everyone was calling at once. But all Blake could think about was Amira and the twins. How was this going to affect them? He excused himself from the meeting and called Keisha immediately. "She's not answering her phone," Keisha said without even saying hello. "Reporters have been calling her all morning. Someone even showed up at the daycare asking about the twins." Blake's heart sank. "Are they okay?" "They're scared, Blake. Amira had to call in sick to work because she's afraid to leave her apartment. Do you understand what you've done to her?" Again, this time, Blake didn't hesitate. "Where is she?" "I'm not telling you that. Keisha, please. I need to protect them." "You need to protect them?" "You're the reason they need protecting." Blake was already grabbing his car keys. I'm going to make this right. How? How are you going to make this right? Blake thought about the board meeting he'd just walked out of, the investors who were probably panicking, the stock price that was probably dropping, the career he'd built that was potentially crumbling. 3 years ago, he'd chosen his reputation over love. Today, he was going to make a different choice. I'm going to tell the truth, Blake said. He drove straight to the local news station and demanded to speak to whoever had broken the story. Within an hour, Blake was sitting in front of the camera, preparing to do something he'd never done before. Put his heart before his image. My name is Blake Carson, he began, looking directly into the camera. And I want to tell you about the worst mistake of my life. For the next 20 minutes, Blake told the world everything. How he'd fallen in love with Amira. How his family had threatened to disown him. How he'd chosen money over love and abandoned the most important person in his life. I found out 3 weeks ago that I have children, he continued, his voice breaking. Twin babies named Zoe and Zion, who I've never met because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. Have you ever watched someone risk everything for love? Blake was about to find out if honesty could heal the wounds his cowardice had created. Amira Daniels is the strongest woman I've ever known, he said, looking directly into the camera. She's raising my children alone while I built an empire on the foundation of my shame. She deserves better than me. But if she'll give me a chance, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man she needed me to be 3 years ago. The interview went viral within hours. Hashtag Blake Carson Truth was trending worldwide. But Blake didn't care about the internet. He only cared about one person's opinion, and she still wasn't answering her phone. The next morning, Blake's world had completely exploded. His phone had 847 missed calls. His publicist had quit. 3 major investors had pulled out of his company. The stock price had dropped 30% overnight. But none of that mattered when he saw the news van parked outside Amira's apartment building. Blake drove there as fast as he could, his heart pounding. A reporter with perfect blonde hair was standing in front of the building, talking into a camera. We're here in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, where Amira Daniels has been hiding with Carson's secret children for over 2 years. Blake parked and ran toward the building, pushing past the small crowd that had gathered. The reporter shoved a microphone in his face. Mr. Carson, are you here to claim your children? How does it feel to be exposed as a deadbeat dad? Get out of here, Blake said, his voice dangerous. Leave them alone. But don't the people deserve to know the truth about? The truth is that I messed up, Blake interrupted. But these are innocent children. They don't deserve this circus. Blake managed to get inside the building and ran up to Amira's apartment. He could hear crying from inside. Not adult crying, but the scared wailing of confused toddlers. He knocked gently. Amira? It's Blake. Please open the door. Go away. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. I'm not leaving until I know you're okay. The door opened just a crack, and Blake saw Amira's face. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hair was a mess, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Are you happy now? She whispered. They're asking questions about the twins at the daycare. I can't go to work. We can't even leave the apartment. Blake's heart broke. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. But it did happen. Just like 3 years ago, your problems became my problems. Behind her, Blake could hear the twins crying. He'd never heard their voices before, and the sound cut through him like a knife. Let me help, Blake said. Let me take care of this. How? How are you going to take care of reporters camping outside my house? How are you going to take care of strangers on the internet calling me a gold digger? How are you going to take care of my babies asking why people with cameras are following us? Have you ever realized that trying to fix a mistake can sometimes make things worse? Blake was learning that good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. I have money, Blake said desperately. I can hire security. I can get you a new apartment. I can. You think money fixes everything? Amira's voice was getting louder. You think you can just throw cash at this and make it disappear? I'm trying to help. You're trying to fix your guilt. There's a difference. Blake could hear neighbors starting to peek out their doors. The twins were crying louder now, and Amira looked like she was about to have a complete breakdown. Please, Blake said quietly. Just let me meet them. Let me explain to them. Explain what? That their father is a coward who only shows up when it's convenient? That he abandoned us and only came back when he got caught? Amira started to close the door, but Blake put his hand against it. Don't make them pay for my mistakes, he said. They deserve to know they have a father who loves them. Love. Amira laughed bitterly. You don't even know them. You don't know that Zoe is afraid of the dark, or that Zion only eats his vegetables if you make airplane noises. You don't know anything about them. Because you won't let me learn. Because you gave up that right 3 years ago. That night, Blake sat in his car outside Amira's building until the last reporter left. He wasn't going home until he knew they were safe. At 2 a.m., his phone rang. It was Keisha. She's in the hospital, Keisha said without greeting him. Blake's blood went cold. What happened? Panic attack. She collapsed at work yesterday and couldn't breathe. The stress of everything. The reporters, the attention, trying to protect the twins. It all became too much. Which hospital? Blake, don't. Which hospital, Keisha? Northwestern Memorial. But her sister is with her. She doesn't want to see you. Blake was already driving. How are the twins? Scared. Confused. They keep asking where their mama is and why all those people with cameras want to talk to them. When Blake got to the hospital, he found Keisha in the waiting room with a woman who looked like a younger version of Amira. This had to be her sister. You must be Blake, the woman said, standing up. Her voice was ice cold. I'm Maya, and you're the reason my sister is in there hooked up to machines. Blake felt like he'd been punched. Is she okay? She's exhausted. She's been working 2 jobs and raising 2 kids alone for 3 years. Then you show up and turn her life upside down all over again. I was trying to make things right by going on TV and making her business public, by bringing reporters to her door, by forcing her to relive the worst time of her life. Blake sat down heavily. I didn't think. That's the problem, Maya interrupted. You never think about anyone but yourself. 3 years ago, you thought about your family's money. Last week, you thought about your guilt. But did you ever think about what Amira wanted? What she needed? Have you ever realized that your good intentions might be someone else's nightmare? Blake was starting to understand that love wasn't just about what you wanted. It was about what was best for the person you loved. Can I see her? Blake asked quietly. She's sleeping. And even if she wasn't, she made me promise not to let you in. Blake nodded. He deserved that. The twins, he said. Are they here? They're at home with my mom. And before you ask, no, you can't see them either. Blake sat in silence for a moment. I set up trust funds for them. $5 million each. They'll never have to worry about money. Money isn't what they need, Maya said. They need stability. They need peace. They need a mother who isn't having panic attacks because their father can't stop making selfish decisions. Then what do? You leave them alone. I can't do that. Why? Because you've suddenly developed a conscience? Because you've decided you want to play daddy now that it's convenient? Blake looked at Maya, and for the first time in weeks, he told the complete truth. Because I love them. Because I love her. Because I've been empty for 3 years without them. Maya studied his face for a long moment. Love isn't a feeling, Blake. It's a choice. And every choice you've made has hurt my sister. I want to make different choices now. Then prove it. Stop thinking about what you want and start thinking about what they need. Blake stood up. What do they need? They need you to disappear until you figure out how to be a man instead of a boy. Blake didn't go home. Instead, he drove to his childhood house in Lincoln Park, the mansion where his parents had raised him to believe that image mattered more than love. His father answered the door in a silk robe, looking annoyed. Blake? What are you doing here at this hour? We need to talk. If this is about that ridiculous interview you gave, I've already spoken to our lawyers. We can fix this. Blake pushed past his father and walked into the living room where his mother was watching the news. On the screen was a photo of Amira and the twins, with a headline that read, Single mom struggles while billionaire ex lives in luxury. Turn it off, Blake said. Blake, darling, his mother said without looking away from the TV. This is exactly what we were trying to prevent. That woman is making you look like a monster. I'm a monster. His father poured himself a drink. Don't be dramatic. You made a smart business decision. You chose your future over a temporary infatuation. I chose money over my family. You chose your real family over some girl you barely knew. Blake felt rage building in his chest. I knew her well enough to marry her. I knew her well enough to love her. And now I know her well enough to realize she's 10 times the person either of you will ever be. His mother finally looked at him. Blake, you're being emotional. That woman has children. She's trying to trap you. Those children are mine. Blake shouted. Your grandchildren, and you're talking about them like they're some kind of disease. We don't know that they're yours, his father said calmly. Have you done a paternity test? I don't need a test. I have eyes. They look exactly like me. Even if they're yours, you can't just uproot your entire life for some woman and her kids. Blake stared at his parents, really looked at them for the first time in years. His father, who'd inherited his money and never worked a real day in his life. His mother, who spent her time at charity galas, taking pictures for social media, instead of actually helping people. You know what? Blake said quietly. You're right. I can't uproot my entire life for them. His parents smiled, thinking they'd won. I can't uproot my life for them because they are my life. Have you ever realized that the people who raised you don't actually know what's best for you? Blake was having that realization right now. If you choose that woman over your family, you're choosing to give up everything we've built, his father said. Everything you've built was built on the backs of people you considered beneath you. I don't want it anymore. Blake, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 3 years. Blake headed toward the door. I'm done caring about what people think. I'm done caring about money. I'm done caring about this family's reputation. And what about your company? Your investors? Your responsibilities? Blake turned back to look at his parents one last time. My only responsibility is to the woman I love and the children I abandoned. Everything else is just noise. He walked out of the mansion and never looked back. But now came a hard part, proving to Amira that he meant what he said. The next morning, Blake called an emergency board meeting. Every investor, every board member, every person who had a stake in Carson Tech was sitting around the conference table, looking worried. Ladies and gentlemen, Blake began, I'm sure you've all seen the news. I'm sure you're all concerned about the company's future. Blake, his lead investor, interrupted. We need to discuss damage control. This scandal is costing us millions. There's no scandal, Blake said calmly. There's just the truth. I fell in love with an incredible woman. I married her, and then I abandoned her when things got difficult. That's not a scandal. That's just me being a coward. Blake, you need to think about what you're saying. I am thinking. For the first time in 3 years, I'm thinking clearly. Blake stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. I've spent the last 3 years building this company because I was running from the biggest mistake of my life. I thought if I made enough money, if I got successful enough, I could forget about the woman and children I left behind. Blake, where is this going? Another board member asked. I'm stepping down as CEO. The room erupted. Everyone was talking at once, voices raised, phones being pulled out to call lawyers and publicists. You can't be serious, someone shouted. I'm completely serious. I'm selling my shares and stepping away from the company. This is financial suicide. This is the first smart decision I've made in 3 years. Blake's assistant burst into the room. Sir, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's about your children. Blake's heart stopped. Amira. No, sir. She says her name is Maya. Blake left the boardroom full of panicking investors and found Maya in his office. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were sharp. My sister is being discharged from the hospital this afternoon, she said without greeting him. Is she okay? She's better, but she's also made a decision. Maya pulled out a manila envelope. She wants you to sign these. Blake opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, papers that would terminate his parental rights to Zoe and Zion permanently. She's giving up on me, Blake said quietly. She's protecting her children. She's protecting herself. Blake stared at the papers. What if I don't sign? Then she'll move. She'll take the kids and disappear completely. You'll never see them again. And if I do sign, then you'll never see them again anyway. But at least they'll have peace. Have you ever been faced with a choice that had no good options? Blake was holding papers that would either destroy his children's future or his own. There's a third option, Blake said. What's that? I proved to her that I'm worth the risk. Maya shook her head. Blake, she's done. She can't take any more heartbreak. She can't handle any more chaos. Then I'll make sure there's no more chaos. Ow! Blake looked around his office, at the awards on the walls, the expensive furniture, the view of the city that had once meant everything to him. I'll give up everything that doesn't matter so I can fight for the only thing that does. Maya studied his face. You'd really do that? You'd give up all this for her? I'd give up everything for 5 minutes with my children. For a chance to show Amira that I'm not the same person who walked away. And if she still says no, then at least I'll know I tried everything. That evening, Blake stood outside Amira's apartment building with a suitcase and a handwritten letter. He'd liquidated everything. Sold his penthouse, his cars, his stock options. Everything except the clothes on his back and enough money to survive. Maya answered the door when he knocked. She doesn't want to see you, Maya said. I know, but I need her to see this. Blake held up the letter. I wrote down everything I want to say, everything I should have said 3 years ago. Maya hesitated, then took the letter. She's putting the twins to bed. But Blake, don't expect miracles. She's been hurt too much. Blake nodded and sat down on the steps outside the building. He wasn't leaving until he got an answer. An hour later, Maya came back outside. She read it, and she's crying. Blake's heart jumped. Is that good or bad? With my sister, it's hard to tell. Can I see her? She wants to talk to you, but not here. She doesn't want the twins to see you until she decides what's going to happen. Maya gave him an address, a small park about 6 blocks away. She'll be there in 20 minutes. Blake ran the entire way. When he got to the park, it was empty except for a few streetlights and a playground that looked like it had seen better days. Blake sat on a bench and waited, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Then he saw her. Amira was walking slowly toward him, wearing the same faded coat he'd seen her in at the bus stop. But this time, she didn't look angry. She looked tired and sad and maybe, just maybe hopeful. She sat down on a bench next to him, but not too close. I read your letter, she said quietly. I meant every word. You said you sold everything. Everything that didn't matter. Your company was your life. No, you were my life. I just forgot that for a while. They sat in silence for a moment, watching their breath make clouds in the cold air. In your letter, you said you want to meet them, Amira said. Only if you're ready. Only if you think it's right. They ask about their daddy sometimes. I've been telling them that he lives far away. Blake felt tears in his eyes. What do you tell them about me? I tell them that their daddy loves them very much, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that are hard to fix. Do you think this mistake can be fixed? Amira looked at him for the first time since she'd sat down. I don't know, but I know that Zoe and Zion deserve to know their father. And I know that you deserve a chance to be the man you should have been 3 years ago. Have you ever been given a second chance at the most important thing in your life? Blake was about to find out if love really could conquer the worst mistakes. There are conditions, Amira said. Anything. You start slow. You earn their trust. You earn mine. And if you hurt them, if you hurt us, even once you're gone forever. Blake nodded. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about grand gestures or buying expensive things. This is about showing up every day, even when it's hard. I'm ready. Amira stood up. We'll see. But for the first time in 3 years, Blake had hope. 3 days later, Blake stood outside McDonald's playground, his hands shaking like he was about to give the most important presentation of his life. Amira had chosen this place for their first meeting, neutral ground where the twins could play if things got awkward. Through the glass windows, he could see them. Zoe was going down the slide, while Zion pushed plastic balls around in the play area. They looked so small, so innocent, so completely unaware that their entire world was about to change. Blake had practiced what he would say 100 times, but now his mind was blank. Amira walked over to where he was standing. You look like you're about to throw up. I feel like it. They're just kids, Blake. You're kids. That's what scares me. Have you ever been more terrified of a 2-year-old than a boardroom full of investors? Blake was learning that being a father was scarier than any business deal he'd ever made. Amira led him inside, and for the first time in 3 years, Blake was in the same room as his children. Zoe looked up from her chicken nuggets and stared at him with those familiar gray eyes. Zoe, Zion, Amira said gently. This is Blake. He's your daddy. Zion tilted his head to one side, studying Blake's face. Daddy. Blake's heart nearly stopped. Buddhi. You're big, Zoe said matter-of-factly. Blake laughed despite his nerves. Yeah, I'm pretty big. Mommy said you live far away, Zion said. I used to, but I don't want to anymore. The twins looked at each other, then back at Blake. They weren't scared, but they weren't running into his arms either. They were just curious. Do you want to play with us? Zoe asked. Blake looked at Amira, who nodded. I'd love to. For the next hour, Blake crawled through plastic tunnels, pushed his kids on swings, and helped them build towers out of blocks. He learned that Zoe loved to laugh and that Zion was more serious but had the sweetest smile. He discovered that they both liked to be tickled and that they called their stuffed animals by silly names. You're funny, Daddy, Zoe said when Blake made a goofy face. Daddy. The word hit Blake like a punch to the chest every time they said it. When it was time to leave, Zion hugged Blake's leg. Will you come back? If your mommy says it's okay. I want you to come back, Zoe said simply. Blake looked at Amira, who was watching everything with careful eyes. Can I come back? We'll see. As they walked to the parking lot, Blake felt like he was floating. His kids, his actual kids, wanted to see him again. They're incredible, he said to Amira. You've done such an amazing job with them. They're good kids. They deserve stability. I want to give them that. Wanting and doing are different things, Blake. Blake stopped walking. What do I have to do to prove I'm serious about this? You don't have to prove anything to me. You have to prove it to them. Ow! Show up. Keep showing up. Even when it's boring. Even when it's hard. Even when they're crying and you don't know what to do. Blake nodded. I can do that. We'll see. But as Blake drove home to his tiny apartment, he realized something had changed. For the first time in 3 years, he had a purpose that had nothing to do with money or success. He had a family to fight for. 2 weeks later, Blake was getting the hang of being a weekend dad. He'd take Zoe and Zion to the park, read them stories, and help Amira with grocery shopping. The twins were warming up to him, and Blake was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, he could really do this. That's when everything went wrong. Blake was at Amira's apartment, helping Zion with a puzzle, when his phone started ringing. It was his former business partner. Blake, you need to get down here right now, Marcus said. The company is collapsing. The investors are pulling out. We need you back. I told you I was done. The stock price has dropped 70%. People are losing their jobs. Your employees are getting laid off because of your little midlife crisis. Blake looked at Zion, who was concentrating hard on fitting a puzzle piece into place. It's not a midlife crisis. It's called priorities. Blake, think about what you're doing. You built this company from nothing. You're throwing away everything you worked for. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what matters. What about the people who work for you? What about their families? Blake felt a knot forming in his stomach. He hadn't thought about his employees when he'd walked away. There were hundreds of people who depended on Carson Tech for their livelihoods. Daddy, look, Zoe ran over with a drawing she'd made. It's you and me and Zion and Mommy. Blake looked at the crayon drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands. It's beautiful, sweetheart, but his phone was still ringing. Marcus was calling back. Blake, I'm serious. If you don't come back, Carson Tech is going to die, and it's going to take a lot of good people down with it. Blake looked at Amira, who was watching him with concern. Take it, she said quietly. It sounds important. Daddy has to take this call, Blake said to the twins. I'll be right back. He stepped into the hallway and answered the phone. Marcus, what do you need me to do? Come back. Take over again. Save the company. I can't. I won't. Blake, think about this rationally. You can still see your kids on weekends. You can still be a father, but you don't have to destroy everything you built. Have you ever had to choose between 2 things you cared about? Blake was learning that sometimes being a good person meant making impossible choices. How long would it take to stabilize things? A few months, maybe 6. You need to be here full-time, working around the clock. Blake closed his eyes. 6 months of 60-hour weeks. 6 months of missing bedtimes and weekend trips to the park. 6 months of choosing work over family again. I can't do it. Blake. I said I can't do it. Find another way." Blake hung up and went back into the apartment. Amira was reading to the twins, but she looked up when he came in. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine." But Blake's phone kept ringing, and every time it rang, he felt the weight of all the people who were depending on him. Not just his children, but the hundreds of employees who might lose their jobs because of his choice. That night, after he'd put the twins to bed, Amira confronted him. "What's really going on with that phone call?" Blake told her everything. The failing company, the employees, the impossible choice between his old life and his new one. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to stay here. With you. With them. Even if it means other people get hurt." Blake didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, Blake woke up to find Amira sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a serious expression. "We need to talk," she said. Blake sat down across from her. "About what?" "About the fact that you're lying to me." "I'm not." "You are. You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes for 3 days. You're distracted when you're playing with the kids. And last night, I heard you pacing in the hallway until 3 a.m. Blake sighed. "The company is falling apart, Amira. Hundreds of people are going to lose their jobs. And you feel responsible." "I am responsible. I built that company. Those people trusted me. So what are you going to do about it?" Blake looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean? What are you going to do? Are you going to let those people lose their jobs to prove a point? Or are you going to figure out a way to help them?" "I can't go back to that life. I won't do that to you and the kids again." "Who said anything about going back?" Blake frowned. "I don't understand." Amira leaned forward. "Blake, you're one of the smartest people I know. You built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. Do you really think the only way to save it is to go back to being the same person you were before?" "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you find a third option. You figure out a way to save those people's jobs without sacrificing your family." Blake shook his head. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Because I don't know how." "So learn. Have you ever had someone believe in you more than you believed in yourself?" Blake was discovering that sometimes the people who love you can see solutions you can't. "What if I mess it up? What if I try to do both and end up failing at everything?" "Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying to do the right thing." Blake looked at Amira, really looked at her. "Why are you pushing me to do this? I thought you wanted me to choose you over work." "I don't want you to choose me over work. I want you to choose us over selfishness. There's a difference." "I don't understand." 3 years ago, you chose your image over love. You chose what was easy over what was right. You chose to run away instead of fight for what mattered. Blake nodded. "Yes. Now you have a chance to choose differently. You can choose to fight for your family and those employees. You can choose to be the man who doesn't run away from hard problems. What if I can't do both?" "Then you'll figure it out." Because that's what fathers do. They figure it out. Blake felt something shift inside him. "You really think I can do this?" "I think you can do anything when you're fighting for the right reasons." Blake stood up and started pacing. "I need to restructure the entire company. Change how we operate. Maybe sell off some divisions, focus on core products." "See? You're already solving the problem." "It would take time. I'd have to work long hours for a while. But you'd be working towards something instead of away from something." Blake stopped pacing and looked at Amira. "Will you help me?" "How? I don't know. But I know I can't do this without you." Amira smiled for the first time in days. "We'll figure it out." 6 months later, Blake was sitting in his new office, a small space above a coffee shop in Pilsen, just 3 blocks from Amira's apartment. He'd successfully restructured Carson Tech, saving most of the jobs while creating a company culture that actually valued work-life balance. He was also completely exhausted. "Daddy, you look tired," Zoe said, climbing onto his lap while he worked on his laptop. "I am tired, sweetheart." "But it's good tired." "What's good tired?" Blake smiled. "It's when you're tired because you've been working hard on something that matters." Zion looked up from his coloring book. "Are we something that matters?" "You're the most important thing in the world." Blake had learned to balance his new life carefully. He worked while the twins were at daycare, took breaks to pick them up and spend time with them, then worked again after they went to bed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in his life, Blake felt like he was actually living instead of just surviving. "Blake," Amira called from the kitchen. "Can you come here for a minute?" Blake found her standing by the window, looking nervous. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I have something to tell you. Blake's heart started racing. What is it? I've been thinking about us. About what we're doing here. Okay. And I think I'm ready to try again. Blake stared at her. Try what again? Us. Really us. Not just co-parenting. Not just friendship. Us. Have you ever been given a gift you didn't think you deserved? Blake was learning that sometimes love really could survive anything. Are you sure? Blake asked quietly. I'm sure. You show me every day for 6 months that you're not the same person who walked away. You've shown up for the kids. You've respected my boundaries. You've built a life that includes us instead of just fitting us in around the edges. Amira, I love you, Blake. I never stopped loving you. But more than that, I trust you now. I trust that you'll fight for us when things get hard. Blake felt tears in his eyes. I will. I promise I will. I know you will. Because you already have. Blake pulled her into his arms and kissed her. The first real kiss they'd shared in 3 years. It tasted like forgiveness and hope and the promise of something better. Zoe giggled from the doorway. Mommy and Daddy are kissing. Come here, you too, Blake said, opening his arms to include the twins in their hug. As he held his entire family in his arms, Blake realized that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his whole life. Not success, not money, not approval from people who didn't matter. He'd found home. So what happens now? Amira asked. Blake looked at his beautiful wife, his incredible children, and the life they'd built together despite all the mistakes and heartbreak. Now we keep showing up, he said, every day, for each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And for the first time in 3 years, Blake Carson was exactly where he belonged. 1 year later, Blake stood in the back of a community center in Pilsen, watching Zoe and Zion play with other kids at a birthday party. The twins were 3 now, confident and happy, with no memory of the time when their parents weren't together. Hard to believe it's been a year, Amira said, joining him by the wall. Best year of my life, Blake replied, even with all the sleepless nights and temper tantrums, especially because of those. Blake looked around the room at the families gathered there. Working parents, single mothers, kids from all different backgrounds playing together. This was his world now, and he loved every imperfect moment of it. I have something for you, Amira said, pulling out a small wrap box. What's this for? It's your 1-year anniversary of showing up. Blake opened the box to find a simple silver watch with an engraving on the back. For the man who chose love over everything else. Amira, it's not expensive, but it's real. Like us. Blake strapped on the watch and pulled his wife close. I love you. I love you too. Daddy, Mommy. Zoe ran over, pulling Zion behind her. Can we get ice cream? After dinner, Amira said, but I want ice cream now. I know, sweetheart, but sometimes we have to wait for good things. Blake smiled. Yeah, sometimes we do. As the party continued around them, Blake thought about the journey that had brought them here. The mistakes, the heartbreak, the slow work of rebuilding trust. The choice to prioritize love over image, family over money, showing up over running away. What are you thinking about? Amira asked. Just how different things could have been. But they're not different. They're exactly as they should be. Blake watched his children laugh and play, completely secure in the knowledge that both their parents would be there when they needed them. No matter what happened in the future, Zoe and Zion would never wonder if they were loved. You know what I learned this year? Blake said, what's that? Success isn't about how much money you make or how many people know your name. It's about how many people you show up for when they need you. And I'd rather be successful at being your husband and their father than successful at anything else. Have you ever found a thing that makes everything else make sense? Blake had finally found his purpose, and it wasn't in a boardroom or a bank account. It was in the everyday moments of loving his family well. Come on, Amira said, taking his hand. Let's go get our kids some ice cream. I thought you said after dinner. I changed my mind. Sometimes the best moments are the ones that don't follow the rules. Blake laughed and followed his wife toward their children, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because that's what families do. They show up for each other. Every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And Blake Carson had finally learned that showing up was the only success that really mattered.